When you think of the Wild West, you might imagine cowboys and adventure, but the real story is more complicated. Native American tribes lived there for thousands of years, but in the 19th century, settlers arrived and took their land. Indigenous people faced broken promises, forced removals, and a fight for survival. The U.S. government made treaties but quickly broke them, leaving tribes struggling. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act, forcing tribes like the Cherokee on the deadly Trail of Tears. Thousands died from hunger, disease, and harsh weather, all so settlers could take their land. Native Americans never stopped fighting back. Leaders like Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse defended their land, even winning the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. Others took their fight to court. Meanwhile, the government sent Native children to boarding schools to erase their culture, but families secretly kept their traditions alive. Westward expansion wasn't just about new opportunities, it had devastating consequences. Settlers destroyed the land, and the near extinction of bison wasn't just overhunting. It was meant to weaken native tribes like the Lakota Sioux, who relied on them for survival. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson, forced thousands of Native Americans, including the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek, on the deadly Trail of Tears. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion took thousands of lives. The West wasn't just a land of adventure, it was a land of struggle and survival. The fight for justice continues today. What the government called progress was really a land grab driven by greed. Gold discoveries caused chaos, creating boom towns like Deadwood and Tombstone, which were wild and violent. The real West wasn't the Hollywood version, it was a place of ambition, hardship, and deep scars that still affect the region today. Frontier towns were often violent, with disputes over land, money, and pride leading to bloodshed. With little law enforcement, people took justice into their own hands, and lynch mobs became common. However, these boom towns were also centers of business and community. Merchants, blacksmiths, and hoteliers helped turn rough camps into real towns, bringing schools, churches, and newspapers. But these towns relied on gold and silver. When the mines ran dry, they were abandoned. Once bustling streets became ghost towns, a reminder of how quickly fortunes in the West could rise and fall. The rise and fall of boom towns also revealed deep inequalities. Miners worked endlessly in search of fortune, but it was often merchants, landowners, and business people who made the real money. While a few became wealthy, many left with nothing. Railroads changed the West, connecting remote areas to busy towns and trade. Trains made life easier for settlers by bringing goods, jobs, and new opportunities. When the Transcontinental Railroad was finished in 1869, it was seen as a great achievement, helping towns and industries like mining and farming grow. But this progress came at a price. Thousands of workers, many of them Chinese immigrants, faced harsh conditions, long hours, and discrimination. They were paid less than white workers and denied basic rights, yet their role in building the West was often ignored. Railroads also took more land from Native Americans, cutting through their lands without permission and disrupting their way of life. For them, the railroad wasn't just progress, it was another tool of conquest. Even small farmers and business owners struggled as railroad companies charged high shipping fees, leaving them in debt. The railroad brought both opportunity and hardship, depending on who you were. As railroads expanded, a new era began, the age of the cowboy. From the 1860s to the 1890s, this period became one of the most romanticized in American history. But the real cowboys weren't just white men, like in Hollywood movies. Many were African American, Native American, or Mexican, people whose role in shaping the West is often overlooked. After the Civil War, many freed black men moved west to work as ranchers and cowboys. Texas had millions of cattle, and demand for beef led to long, tough cattle drives along trails like the Chisholm Trail. Cowboys battled harsh weather, stampedes, and river crossings, while also facing rustlers and conflicts with native tribes. Despite the hardships, they built a unique culture with black, Mexican, Native American, and white cowboys working side by side. By the late 1880s, the cowboy era was fading. Railroads expanded, making long cattle drives unnecessary. Barbed wire, invented in 1874, allowed ranchers to fence off land, ending open-range grazing. Then the brutal winter of 1886 to 1887 killed thousands of cattle, dealing another blow to the cowboy way of life. Cowboys became legends through dime novels and Hollywood, but their real lives were hard and dangerous. Their legacy of toughness and independence lives on. Meanwhile, cattle ranching led to new conflicts, as native tribes like the Comanche and Apache fought to protect their lands. The Dawes Act of 1887 further hurt indigenous communities by breaking up tribal lands and selling much of it to settlers, another major loss of native sovereignty. Natural resources were just as valuable as land and changed the West forever. The discovery of silver in Nevada's Comstock lode and copper booms in Montana and Colorado fueled industry, but at a high cost. Native communities were pushed from their lands and miners worked in harsh, dangerous conditions for little pay. Mexican and Mexican-American communities also faced hardships. After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, thousands who had been Mexican citizens suddenly became foreigners in their own homeland. Despite discrimination and land seizures, they shaped the West's agriculture, architecture, and culture. Women played a bigger role in the West than history often shows. Many ran businesses, fought for workers' rights, and defended Native American lands. Sarah Winnemucca, a Northern Paiute activist, spoke out against injustice and worked to protect her people's culture. The West also became a place for social change. Reformers left crowded Eastern cities to experiment with new ways of living, like the communal societies of New Harmony and the Oneida community, hoping to build a more equal world. Not all social movements in the West were peaceful. The rise of Mormonism, for example, brought both innovation and controversy. After facing persecution in the East, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints moved west, founding Salt Lake City. Their contributions to Utah's growth were significant, but their practice of polygamy led to conflicts with the federal government. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, the myth of the American West grew stronger. Dime novels told stories of heroic settlers and noble cowboys, while Wild West shows like Buffalo Bill's Traveling Spectacle thrilled audiences worldwide. But these tales ignored the harsher truths: the loss of native lands, the exploitation of workers, and the environmental destruction caused by expansion. Hollywood took this myth even further. Western films painted the region as a place where rugged individualists triumphed, and good always defeated evil. But off-screen, new power structures were emerging. Corporations and the federal government gained control, using the West's vast resources on a massive scale. One of the most powerful symbols of this change was the Hoover Dam, completed in 1935. It was an engineering marvel, providing water and electricity to fast-growing cities. But it also reshaped the Colorado River, permanently altering the landscape and marking a turning point in the West's environmental history. Throughout the 20th century, the American West saw both progress and struggle. The civil rights movement inspired Native American and Mexican American activism, with groups like AIM fighting for indigenous land rights through protests like the Alcatraz occupation. Meanwhile, economic shifts reshaped the region. Silicon Valley became a tech hub, and oil booms fueled state economies. However, these changes deepened inequality and environmental damage. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s exemplified the fragile balance between prosperity and disaster, as decades of poor farming practices and drought turned fertile land into a barren wasteland, forcing thousands to migrate in search of survival. The dream of the West turned into a nightmare during the Dust Bowl, as severe drought and poor farming practices devastated states like Oklahoma and Texas. Hundreds of thousands were forced to flee, seeking refuge in California, only to face hostility and harsh conditions. Many, labeled Okies, lived in makeshift camps and toiled in backbreaking farm labor for meager wages. For them, the West's promise of opportunity was an illusion, exposing the deep inequalities that shaped the region's history. Workers in the West faced harsh conditions in industries like coal mining, timber, and large-scale farming. Low wages and dangerous work led to violent strikes, like the 1914 Ludlow Massacre in Colorado, where the National Guard killed over 20 striking coal miners and their families. Native Americans were also forced to assimilate through government-run boarding schools meant to erase their culture. The 1924 Indian Citizenship Act made them U.S. citizens, but it didn't fix land loss, economic struggles, or discrimination, leading to ongoing fights for indigenous rights. During World War II, the West became a key part of the war effort. Factories in cities like Los Angeles and Seattle built planes and ships, creating jobs for women and minorities. But the war also exposed deep injustices. After Pearl Harbor, over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, were forced into internment camps like Manzanar, losing their homes and businesses. After the war, cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas grew fast with suburban expansion. Highways and cheap cars boosted tourism and industry. But large water projects like the Central Arizona Project caused conflicts over shrinking water supplies, straining the region's fragile environment. Water shortages hit rural and native communities the hardest, sparking fierce legal battles over the Colorado River's water, many of which continue today. By the 1960s and 70s, unchecked development had taken a toll, leading activists to fight for conservation. While national parks and wilderness areas were created, indigenous peoples were often displaced in the process. At the same time, the counterculture movement brought hippies and idealists seeking escape from mainstream society, viewing the West as a place for reinvention. Meanwhile, the Chicano movement, led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, fought for farm workers' rights, using strikes and boycotts to expose economic injustices. Native American activists fought for justice, with the American Indian Movement, AIM, staging protests like the 1973 occupation of Wounded Knee, to demand that the U.S. government honor its treaties and respect indigenous sovereignty. By the late 20th century, economic shifts transformed the West. Manufacturing declined while technology and service industries surged. Silicon Valley became a global tech hub, generating vast wealth but deepening inequality. Meanwhile, cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco grappled with housing shortages, homelessness, and environmental issues, challenging the old myth of the West as a land of boundless opportunity. Today, climate change poses one of the region's greatest threats, with droughts, wildfires, and water crises endangering communities. Indigenous groups, long at the forefront of environmental stewardship, are leading efforts to combat these challenges using traditional knowledge and sustainable practices. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Hidden West Side stories.